You know what nobody really prepares you for? It's not the paperwork, it's not the doctor appointments, it's not even the financial decisions. It's the moment you realize your parents are starting to depend on you emotionally, physically, and mentally, while still trying to act like they don't need help at all. And if you're going through this right now, you already know how complicated it feels. Because one minute you're trying to help, and the next minute you're arguing with the people who raised you. You feel guilty. They feel defensive. Siblings start disagreeing. Everyone's stressed. And somehow the adult child who stepped up to help becomes the bad guy. I've seen this happen over and over again with families. And honestly, most people don't talk about the emotional side of this enough. So in this video, I want to talk about the hardest part of helping aging parents, the part nobody warns you about, not from a textbook perspective, but from real life. Because this stage of life can quietly crush people emotionally if they're not prepared for it. And if you're feeling overwhelmed right now, you're definitely not alone. One of the hardest emotions adult children deal with is guilt. Guilt for not doing enough, guilt for being frustrated, guilt for feeling exhausted, guilt for losing patience. A lot of people think if I were a better son or daughter, this wouldn't bother me. That's not true. You're trying to balance your own life, your own stress, your own bills, your own marriage, your own kids, your own health, while suddenly becoming partially responsible for someone else's life too. That's a massive emotional load. What makes it even harder is this. Aging parents often don't realize how much pressure their children are under. Not because they're selfish, because they're scared too. Aging is terrifying for a lot of people. Losing independence feels humiliating. Needing help after spending decades being self-sufficient can create anger, denial, stubbornness, and fear. So when a parent says, I'm fine, I don't need help, stop treating me like a child, a lot of times what they're really saying is, I'm scared my life is changing. And that changes how you hear those conversations. Another thing nobody talks enough about is resistance. You can know your parent needs help. Your siblings know they need help. The neighbors can know they need help. But if they don't accept it, everything becomes harder. And this is where adult children start burning out emotionally because logic stops working. You think, they fell twice, they forgot medication, they can't manage the house, the bills are piling up. And your parent still says, I'm staying right here. That creates an emotional war inside families, especially when safety becomes involved. At some point, many adult children realize something painful. You cannot force someone to emotionally accept aging. That realization is brutal because deep down, many people believe if I explain it better, they'll understand. Sometimes they won't. Not because they're irrational, because accepting help can feel like admitting life is changing permanently. And for many seniors, that feels like grief, real grief. The loss of freedom, the loss of control, the loss of identity. That's why these conversations become emotional so fast. You're talking about logistics, but they're hearing loss. And then there's family tension. This might be the most explosive part of the entire process because when parents start declining, old family dynamics come roaring back to life. The responsible sibling becomes more responsible. The distant sibling suddenly becomes opinionated. The uninvolved sibling questions every decision, and the caregiving sibling starts feeling resentful. I see this constantly. One child handles everything: the doctor appointments, finances, house maintenance, emergency calls, hospital visits. Meanwhile, another sibling lives out of state and says, well, I just think we shouldn't rush anything. Easy to say when you're not the one getting midnight phone calls, and resentment starts building fast, especially when one sibling sacrifices their time, emotional energy, career, career flexibility, or finances while others contribute very little. Here's the hard truth. Caregiving exposes family fractures that already existed. It doesn't create them, it reveals them. And many adult children quietly carry enormous resentment because they feel abandoned by their own family during this stage. That resentment can destroy relationships if not addressed honestly. Another painful reality nobody prepares you for is becoming the decision maker. That transition is emotionally brutal because suddenly the people who made decisions for you your entire life can no longer manage certain decisions themselves. And now you have to step in. That role reversal feels deeply uncomfortable, especially in the beginning. You start asking yourself questions like, who am I to tell my parents what they should do? But in the state, but at the same time, you know problems are getting worse. So you live in this emotional gray area where every decision feels heavy. Should they still drive? Should they still live alone? Should they sell the house? Do they need assisted living? Can they manage medication safely? What happens if they fall again? These decisions don't just feel practical, they feel emotional because every decision represents change. And many adult children feel enormous pressure because they're terrified of making the wrong choice, especially when siblings disagree, or parents resist, or finances are limited. There's no perfect roadmap for this. Most families are figuring out while emotionally exhausted. And here's something else people don't say out loud enough. Helping aging parents can completely consume your mental bandwidth. Even when you're not physically with them, you're thinking about them. You're worrying constantly. What if they fall today? What if they forget medication? What if they don't answer the phone? What if there's another hospital visit? What if things suddenly get worse? That chronic stress wears people down slowly. A lot of adult children are functioning in survival mode for years without realizing it. Still going to work, still paying bills, still handling life, but mentally exhausted all the time. And because caregiving often happens gradually, people don't notice how emotionally drained they've become until they hit a wall. That wall can look like burnout, anger, depression, health problems, marriage stress, emotional numbness, and unfortunately, many caregivers feel guilty even admitting they're struggling. But struggling does not mean you don't love your parents. It means you're human. One of the biggest mistakes families make during the season is waiting too long to have honest conversations. Everybody avoids the discussion because it feels uncomfortable. Parents avoid it because they fear losing independence. Children avoid it because they fear conflict. So everyone delays decisions until a crisis forces action. And crisis decisions are almost always harder. A fall, a hospitalization, a dementia diagnosis, a financial emergency. Suddenly, decisions that could have been gradual become urgent. That's why proactive conversations matter so much, even though they're uncomfortable. Honestly, the families who navigate this season best usually aren't the families without problems. They're the families willing to communicate early, even imperfectly. Now, let me say something important here. If you're helping aging parents right now, you don't have to carry every piece of this alone. A lot of adult children think asking for help means failing. It doesn't. This process is too emotionally heavy for one person to manage indefinitely by themselves. Sometimes help looks like family meetings. Sometimes it looks like hiring professionals. Sometimes it looks like talking to elder law attorneys. Sometimes it looks like therapists or caregiver support groups. And sometimes it looks like having honest boundaries, because if one person becomes emotionally destroyed trying to save everyone else, the entire family suffers. And many caregivers wait until complete burnout before asking for support. That's dangerous. I also want to say something directly to the adult children carrying most of the responsibility right now. You may never get full appreciation for what you're doing. That hurts, but it's real. Sometimes siblings don't understand the burden because they're not physically present. Sometimes parents don't realize how much you're sacrificing because they're consumed by their own fears. And sometimes caregiving simply becomes invisible to everyone except the person carrying it. But what you're doing matters, even when it feels thankless, even when it feels exhausting, even when nobody says it enough. One of the most emotional moments families face is realizing their parent may never fully become easy about accepting help. A lot of adult children keep waiting for the breakthrough moment where their parent finally says, "You're right, thank you for helping me." Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, but parents remain resistant until the very end. That doesn't necessarily mean you failed. What's important to understand is that you're dealing with human emotion, identity, fear, pride, aging, and loss, not just decision making. And humans are complicated, especially during major life transitions. Another thing people struggle with is grief before loss. This surprises many families because their parent is still alive, but things are changing. Conversations change, memory changes, energy changes, roles change. Traditions change, and adult children quietly start grieving their version of the parent they used to know. That grief can feel confusing because you feel guilty grieving someone who is still here. But anticipatory grief is real, and many people experience it during this season. I think one of the healthiest mindset shifts families can make is this: stop trying to create a perfect situation. There usually isn't one. Many families are choosing between imperfect options. That's reality. Maybe your parent doesn't want to move. Maybe finances are limited. Maybe siblings disagree. Maybe care options aren't ideal. And maybe timing feels wrong. You're not trying to create perfection. You're trying to create safety, dignity, stability, and the best quality of life possible under real world circumstances. That mindset shift matters because perfectionism destroys caregivers emotionally. And if you're someone currently carrying this burden, I want you to hear this clearly. You're allowed to feel overwhelmed. You're allowed to feel tired. You're allowed to feel frustrated sometimes. Loving your parents and struggling emotionally at the same time can both be true. Those things are not opposites. In fact, the people struggling the most emotionally are often the people carrying the deepest. One thing I've noticed after years around these situations is the families that come through this season the strongest usually stop fighting reality sooner. Not because they like it, not because it's easy, but because acceptance allows better decisions. Denial delays solutions. Acceptance creates movement. That doesn't mean giving up on your parent. It means facing the situation honestly enough to protect everyone involved. And if you're watching this while feeling buried emotionally, please know this: you don't have to solve the next 5 years today. Focus on the next right step. That's it. The next conversation, the next decision, the next appointment, the next solution. Trying to mentally solve the entire future all at once is what overwhelms people. One step at a time matters more than people realize. I truly believe this stage of life reveals something powerful about families. Not flawless relationships, but love expressed through responsibility. And responsibility is heavy, sometimes very heavy. Helping aging parents may be one of the hardest emotional seasons many people ever experience because you're trying to protect people you love while slowly realizing you cannot stop time. That's painful, but showing up still matters, even imperfectly, even emotionally exhausted, even scared. It matters. If your family is currently facing difficult decisions involving housing, downsizing, selling a home, assisted living transitions, or navigating the overwhelming logistics that often come with this stage of life, that's exactly why I created Senior Housing Solutions. My goal is to help families reduce stress, avoid costly mistakes, and navigate these transitions with clarity and compassion. Because most families are trying to figure this out while emotionally overwhelmed, and nobody should have to do it completely alone. If this video helped you, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone else going through this season right now. Sometimes the people carrying the heaviest emotional burden are also people least likely to ask for help, and they may need to hear this more than you realize. Thanks for watching.